Greetings and welcome to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's webinar series. My name is John Ruzek and I'm the Senior Director of Alumni Networks and your host today. Thanks to all the alumni and friends who have made time to join us live. And we have a great topic. It's been very popular from the beginning when we started promoting earlier in September, and I'm glad that everyone's here today. So in today's work world, tactful self-promotion is extraordinarily useful, in fact critical, a career competency and relevant at any career stage. It's not enough to do a good job. People need to know what you're accomplishing, and today's webinar will help you build some strategies around that. And first, just some housekeeping items. Today's webinar is part of an ongoing free series being offered by the Alumni Association, where we're having conversations with experts about career, life, and learning topics. We started 3 years ago, and since then we've had over 7,000 day of attendees, and we just passed 19,000 total YouTube views of the webinars. So thanks to all the alumni, students, and friends who have made time to join these webinars either live or checking it out on YouTube. Initiatives like this webinar series are made possible in part by our Alumni Association members. Thank you so much. Because of our members, we can create powerful opportunities for students and our nearly 500,000 alumni around the world. And if you're interested, check us out at umnalumni.org/membership. Also, just in time for the holiday season, we have our new Minnesota Alumni Market, where we're featuring alumni makers that feature everything from home goods to books, apparels, and very unique product lines. So if you're interested in supporting some of these homegrown alumni makers, visit mnalumnimarket.com. Just wanted to make sure I got that URL correct. And we will be having more webinars coming up after the new year. We have one totally on the books right now, February 1, Social Media Do's and Don'ts for Career Advancement in the Job Search, featuring myself and a couple alumni panelists. And we'll be rolling out the full series come January as well. So check out umnalumni.org/virtual for that. A few housekeeping items for GoToWebinar. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel and dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience audio difficulties while listening via your computer speakers, this can be caused by having multiple applications open or possibly listening in via wireless. So close anything that's unnecessary and possibly move over to a hardwired connection if you're having any connectivity issues. Questions will be welcome along the way. There'll be a few points during the presentation where a presenter will be asking for your questions and comments. So you'll type them into the questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. So when those time comes, just feel free to type in questions in the question pane. And it is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Nancy Burke. Nancy is a seasoned career coach who helps people find their appropriate fit in the workplace and who works with people who want to explore and design the next step in their careers. Through her business, Burke&Penn, she works with baby boomers who need the confidence, courage, and clarity to find their future past age 50 and to plan a bold second half of life. She's worked in human resource capacities for a variety of corporations here in the Twin Cities and has had her own consulting business. Nancy is co-author of Power Your Career, The Art of Tactful Self-Promotion at Work, a book which has won 5 national awards. Nancy is a proud alumna of the University of Minnesota with a BA in Liberal Arts and a Master of Arts in Adult Education and Adult Development. It is my pleasure to welcome Nancy here today with us.
Thank you, John, and great to be here. We had a lot of interest in this topic, which leads me to believe that you either love the idea of self-promotion or perhaps not. So I'd like to hear from you right now. Let me ask you, when you hear the term self-promotion, what words come to mind? And if you have a reaction to that, just pop them into the chat box. Networking. What other words hit you when you think about the term self-promotion? Braggart. Men. Okay, fake, fear. How to be humble but forward. Walking a fine line. Big ego. So these are very typical for when we when we ask people that question, we usually hear words like obnoxious, braggart, pushy, boastful, etc., not positive. The idea of self-promotion makes many of us uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be this way. And if you don't do any self-promotion, no one else is going to do it for you. Our careers are yo-yo. You're on your own. And if you don't do self-promotion for yourself, for your function, for your employees, what happens? You're going to miss out on a job you might want, the rewards you're hoping for, the recognition that you and your department deserve. And the truth is, we're always promoting something. Every time you say something, every time you enter a room, you are creating an impression, and it builds to your reputation. The question is what you're promoting things that are helpful in your career? Now, my co-author and I have worked with literally thousands of people over the last many years, and we see people who are doing good, even great work, and they're just not getting recognized. So after working with a lot of people, we put together a model that we think kind of covers what we're going to be doing. So it's a three-legged model, for lack of a better word. The first one is positioning yourself. People need to know what you stand for. It's kind of your brand. You need to be able to articulate your value in a way that grabs people's ears. We'll talk more about that. The second one is developing strategic relationships. That is, we influence primarily through our relationships. So my question is always, do you have them with the right people? And finally, increasing your constructive visibility. That is, you need to build your reputation beyond the people that you know personally, which would be in your network or the strategic relationships. So we're going to touch on all three of these strategies along with 3 or 4 tactics that go along with them. You can actually take a look at what we're doing through several perspectives. First of all, some of you might be interested in your own career and how can I advance beyond where I am or move sideways and do something differently. As a leader, you might want to coach your employees and helping them with their careers and representing your own department. If you're a consultant or somebody who's self-employed, these are absolutely essential for getting the word out and for getting business. And also, if you happen to be in transition between careers, this is absolutely invaluable, being able to promote yourself. So as we work through the examples, you can use this, any and all of the lenses that I've just mentioned. So my intention is to present you with some practical ideas that everyone can use. When you look at the full model, it can be a little overwhelming, but it is not complicated and doesn't have to be overwhelming. It just takes moments and primarily being prepared for the moments that present themselves to you. Let me tell you the story that really is the genesis of how we put this whole thing together. My co-author, Richard, grew up in Silicon Valley. And he was working in a career center. He was walking across campus. They have campuses there, not buildings. They were walking across campus, and Richard and his coworker Laura ran into their boss, Tim. Tim said, "Hey guys, how's it going?" And Laura said, "Great. We just finished the beta test for the new interview workshop that we're going to be doing. I think it's really going to work, and I think it's going to help our clients get jobs faster." Tim said, "Great. Let me know how it goes." Then he turned to Richard, my co-author, and said, "Richard, how are you doing?" And Richard said, "Fine." Now, at the end of that 15-second interaction, so I said it didn't take a lot of time necessarily, what did the boss know about Laura? He knew a lot about what she was doing. She was enthusiastic, etc. And what did he know about Richard in the same amount of time? Not much. It was a missed opportunity. When he walked away, Laura, being a great career coach, gave Richard a jab in the ribs and said, "What are you thinking? How is the boss going to know what you're doing unless you tell him?" He said, So the boss didn't know anything extra about him. So he could have done worse. he could have fallen into a trap that many of us fall into, and that is complaining. So somebody asks you, how's it going? And what do? You often talk about how busy you are, how many hours you put in last weekend, the boss, the incessant meetings that we have to go to, whatever. And then often the conversation can spiral downward. And have you done anything to promote yourself positively? Probably not. So if you recognize this kind of a conversation, this very common conversation, instead of positioning ourselves as enthusiastic, we are seen as downers or complainers. And now I'm going to share another story with you. And now we wrote this book. We do know about how to promote ourselves. But this happened about a little over a year ago. We were getting ready to speak to a large group of IT folks. And we were in the back of the room with a little table of books, and a young man came up to me and said, "Wow, you wrote a book. That must be exciting." And I said, "Oh, you have no idea how hard it was to push this thing over the finish line. And now we have to sell and market this book." So at the end of that, my co-author Richard gave me the jab in the ribs and said, "I don't think people are going to buy a book from somebody who's complaining." So the reason I tell that story is we know how to do this, and yet I fell into the same trap as happens often. I didn't do anything to promote myself, the book, etc. So if this is your habit, if you have done this, this is the time you can really think about replacing it with something else. As I said a few minutes ago, we're always promoting something. Do you want to be a downer? Do you want to be fine like Richard? Or do you want to be great like Laura? So let's move to the first leg of the stool, or the first bucket that we have, positioning yourself. So we've been looking at Laura and sharing accomplishments. So I think you'll agree, Laura wasn't a braggart, I don't think. She simply said what she was doing with enthusiasm. She tied it to the outcomes that the boss cared about. She was adding value, and she was prepared to talk about what she was doing. And she got an invite from the boss to follow up with him and tell him how it's going. She didn't have to compare herself to Richard, saying, I'm really great and he is a slug. I guess he did that for himself. But all she did was simply answer the question, how's it going, with a statement, an enthusiastic statement about what she was doing. So all of you are accomplishing things in your personal life and your work lives all the time. So this is all this is a reminder to build a habit, to be ready to talk about what's going on with you. You've just learned something. You're doing something. You've just accomplished something. So one of the tactics that we use is the ability to talk about what you're doing. So, for example, you run into a colleague at work who asks, "How are things going?" What will your answer be? Take just a second and jot down for yourself. You don't have to put it in the chat box. What would you say if this afternoon somebody says, "How's it going?" What's something that can promote yourself as an enthusiastic person who knows something about something? Or how was the webinar that you attended? It was great. You can always say that it was great. And here's what I'm taking away that I think can make a difference in our department. So just jot something down briefly about what you might do this afternoon when somebody asks you a question. Now, it's really a matter of habit. Laura was in the habit of talking about what she was working on, and not all of us are. So sharing accomplishments and learning is important. A bigger idea, however, is to talk about your value proposition. Well, let me back up a minute. So when do you promote yourself with a story, and when is it okay to say just fine, because you're not always going to talk about what you're doing? So when do you want to tell a work story? If you're in the hallway at work, if you're riding the elevator with the CEO, or another executive who may not know you. I did that once with the CEO of a company I was new to, and we went 33 floors, and I never did introduce myself. So there are times to do it. There are times when somebody says, how's it going? And fine is just fine. There are times when a personal story, oh great, I'm going on vacation, we're traveling to Europe or Cuba or someplace else. But when you tell a personal story, you can be enthusiastic and positive, which is great, but you're not promoting yourself as a professional necessarily. So be strategic in how you decide to talk about your accomplishments. Now, the next one is, what do you want to be known for? This is basically your brand, your positioning statement. We call it a value proposition. It's your brand promise. I am amazed at how frequently I talk to people who are actually heading into interviews who cannot succinctly tell me what their value is. And they are very well qualified for the job that they're interviewing for, but they aren't well versed in how do I tell somebody about it without seeming that I'm bragging. So what might Laura's value proposition have been? Well, we wanted to focus on outcomes. So you want to think about what value do you add to your clients and customers? What are your gifts and talents that are unique? Because you may be in a department, 10 people doing a similar thing. However, you all do it a little differently. What do you do that's unique? How have you used these to make a contribution? And what differentiates you from your peers? As you think about putting this together, you want to have very simple language, 8th grade language. I always talk about, it has to be something that my mother understands. Taps into listeners' wants. It conveys passion and energy. If you really talk about what you love to do, your enthusiasm will be contagious. It needs to be in language that people remember, something that's vivid, and it's repeatable. So Laura's might be, I build tools and training that help people find great jobs as quickly as possible and have fun in the process. So think about what outcome you want to produce. And beware of jargon. We said use vivid language, not business jargon. We all know what that is. So here's an example of a person, a client that was a consultant, a client of ours. So the first time that we had her do this, we said, well, tell us about yourself. She said, I'm an OD consultant who structures synergy between organizational silos to create multifunctional alignment that produces high engagement cultures. So is that a groan, a fine, or a great? I'd say that's in the groan area. First of all, because people often don't know what an OD consultant is. It's an organization development consultant. So we had her redo it, and the next one was, I'm an OD consultant who partners with leaders to create high engagement cultures that attract top talent and drive high performance. You know, that's probably in the fine category. I'm an OD consultant who partners with leaders to create high engagement cultures. Again, a little bit of HR lingo. So we really worked with her to increase the impact and memorability. She decided to make it more vivid. So finally we got to, what do? I help companies create workplaces where people can't wait to get there in the morning and don't want to leave at night. Very plain language. She can say it with excitement and people get it. So now if you are working on your brand statement, your brand promise, your value proposition, this is not something that you do in 2 minutes. A consultant friend of mine said you have to do at least 50 versions of it before you get close to something that sounds right. You want to probably have 3 different versions. You want to have one if you're in an interview where it's more extensive and you want to have a few bullets under the main statement about maybe a few of your accomplishments, how you do it, etc. So it's going to be a little longer and a little more formal when you're in an interview. You want something that's less formal when you're networking, and then you want something that when you're at the barbecue or the cocktail party, that when people say, what do, you have an answer for it, and something that people may want to ask questions about, or at least they know enough about you to pass it on. So I'm going to do two things simultaneously if we all can do that. I'd like you to jot down a few ideas about what might be in your value statement. And I also would like to open this up to what questions do you have right now from what we've covered so far on positioning yourself before we move on to the next leg of the stool.
So feel free if there's questions that you have right now. We'll take some of them and also take this time to jot down some of those thoughts Nancy was talking about, but we'll give it a few seconds here. If don't be shy. If you do have questions, feel free to type them into the question pane of GoToWebinar. All right, we got a few questions coming in here.
Okay. Is it okay to discuss personal passions with a work contact? Good question. When I talked about you want to make sure that it's appropriate, I think it's fine. I think it would be somebody who you know well. I would say something personal is fine. On the other hand, if you like to do the personal thing, I would say make sure that you don't neglect what you're working on, what you're accomplishing on the job. So for example, oh, I just joined the XYZ team that's working on this, and right now we're facing our first milestone. Somebody knows something about you. So both, it's both of them. So balance both the personal and the work-related when you're at work, but it's absolutely appropriate to add personal. So when you're passing in the hallway and you know they're busy, that's part of the art of this. You're not going to always have a conversation and talk about what you're up to. Sometimes people only want to do the fine. But if you find yourself always doing that, then I think you want to make sure that you're taking a little time and thinking about who is this and what importance might it be. Or, you know, I'd like to talk to you later about the work I'm doing on XYZ project. Do you workshop your statements with others or have a recommendation on a place we can do that? Well, virtually any career center I would think would give you the opportunity to do some practicing. You can hire a career coach to do that, or you can do it with coworkers. So I think there's lots of opportunities if you've got a good friend. What I find doesn't work so much as family. They're not so helpful with you, but I think coworkers are fine. If you're transitioning industries, how do you position yourself? That one just disappeared on me. Yeah. There we are. For example, in marketing, what's a strategic and succinct way to best position yourself? Well, what I would do is pull out of your background what it is that you've done that you would fit with the place where you want to go. Because, yes, what I mentioned were things where people would be staying in the same industry, but you can take a course and learn the lingo in the new or the jargon in the new industry or the new profession that you'd like to go into, and start to talk that way with people who are in it. I would meet with people in that industry and or profession and find out what they know and how to talk with them. So yeah, it's very important to be talking about where you want to go rather than where you are right now. How do you handle self-promotion when you have an insecure boss? Great question. And I think what you have to do is, without surprising that boss, I think you want to absolutely let him or her know what you're doing, but I would find some people, maybe his or her peers, other people in the organization that you can talk to and talk with them, or you may have to find some people in your same profession or industry outside of your own company. So I would say I would try to get the boss on my side by asking for his or her help. And If you can do that, then you can get some introductions to elsewhere in the organization. So I think that's the last one. I'll do one more here. This is a senior at the University of Minnesota, and how do I make a value statement as an emerging professional in the media advertising world when I don't have a specific brand yet? Well, I will say we all have brands, because whatever your reputation is, that kind of is your brand. You can help shape it, though. You probably have, I'm assuming you've done some internships, and if you've done some internships or you've done some projects in class, I would weave those into it. If you have an advisor who knows you well, I would ask, if I were to talk about my brand, what comes to your mind? Or if there's a couple professors that know you well, what would you say about me? So I think that you do have a brand, and I actually have done a lot of work with college sophomores who are preparing for internships, and we can do a brand. And even with your part-time jobs that you probably have had through high school and college, there's probably some ways that you've done those jobs that make you a standout. So talking to former bosses, etc., is a good thing to do. Okay, lots of great questions. I wish we had time, but we're not going to be able to go anywhere. But there will be a recording and a PowerPoint available after this session, and John will tell you how to access that at the end of this. So yes, indeed it will. Okay, and of course you could buy our book because it's all in the book as well. Okay, so it's not enough that people know that you are able to articulate what you're learning and your accomplishments, and also have a strong branding statement. It is also important to, if nobody knows about it, then it doesn't do any good. So you're not going to get very far unless you have a robust set of relationships. There's no question that maintaining a strong network is critical. Why? Well, because we make things happen through our relationships. And people do business and hire and want to be with people they know, like, and trust. So, and these are relationships. They're not just your LinkedIn connections. So people know that they should be building this. However, most of us do not make the effort in building a career network unless we're kind of at a desperate point where we've lost our jobs or something like that. So I want you to think about, you all know that you should be spending time building strategic relationships or building a network. Why don't you? So throw a couple words up into the chat box right now. Why don't you spend the time and make the effort to network as much as you can? Now is your time to sound off. I hate networking. Okay. Other people in my company dislike my boss. I'm shy. That's one we hear a lot. Time and time-consuming and exhausting, we hear all the time. It can feel contrived. Yes, small talk is wearying. Okay, so we hear those all the time. There are 4 that tend to be the biggest barriers to overcome when we're trying to build relationships. The first one, with a capital M, is mindset. Mindset is, I'm an introvert. I don't like selling. It feels like it's the worst kind of selling. And so having worked with people in this arena for many years, one of the mindset changes is think about it as doing research rather than selling. Make it a pull that people want to talk with you rather than a push. You're pushing yourself. So if you approach networking or building relationships as a research project, make it literal. Don't make it psychological. Make it research. It will become much easier because I've been doing this for a lot of time, but I still network and I still learn some new things. I don't know everything I need to know, and I suspect that it's not. That it's true for you as well. There's a lot of things that you can learn. So you can have some good questions. And I think Marcia Ballinger has spoken in this series, and she has a great book called The 20-Minute Networking Meeting. that is very helpful for framing up questions. But think about it as research, because that's truly what it is, and that's how you develop relationships. So let me tell you of a case study that's in our book. A woman named Natasha, who was a marketing director in a good-sized company, and there was an international assignment open, and she really wanted that international assignment. And she had credentials. You know, she had taken Spanish in college and had 1 semester abroad. Well, she did not get the assignment. And one of the large reasons was that the executives who were in the room making the decision, for the most part, did not know her and didn't know much about her. Now, having been in large corporations, I know that that happens all the time. When she learned that, she didn't have a large group of supporters among that group. She was determined that this was not going to happen again. So she needed to be seen as somebody who was an expert, not the expert, but an expert in her area, and learn what she needed to be able to do to position herself. So after spending some time thinking about it, she decided to write an article. She approached the in-house newsletter for her company. She did get the support of her boss. She decided to write an article on how do you best prepare for an international assignment. She got the support of her boss and introductions to her boss's peers and his boss's peers. And so she made appointments. She had done great research. She had very good questions. And she had some really good interviews in learning a lot about the real world of international assignments. So while her task was to write an article, her purpose was to build a very good network among senior people. So she also had the permission of all of them to go back with further questions. She had, and she also wanted quotes from them, and she got the permission to go back with quotes. So she was building relationships all along. She wrote an article for the company newsletter, which was received well. She posted it on LinkedIn in her summary, or the link, and the link was in her summary. So now she has a byline as a little bit of an expert, at least somebody who's knowledgeable on an international topic. She's associated with people that she interviewed. She learned things that she needs to know, and had a lot of good relationships in key places. So you get the idea what she got out of it. So by becoming known to people that were important in her international assignment and building relationships with them, she eventually got that international assignment. So now this is more time consuming than some of the other things we talked about, but it is a project that can be done within a reasonable length of time. And it served her in many different ways. But if you're really busy, it is something that you have to fit in. So, but changing your mindset to doing research can do wonders for making you a little bit more comfortable to making the phone calls, going to meet with people, and asking questions. The second barrier that we have is not being clear on what our goal or strategy. So why are you wanting to build this network? Who should be in your relationships? And what is your message? What are your questions? So you probably already have a lot of peers in your network. But if you look out a year, whether you're a senior in college and you're looking for, you know that you're going to be looking for your first career job, or whether you're mid-career and you really want to make a change in organization, you want to make even an industry change, who should you know next? What senior people in your organization, if you want to stay in your same organization, who should you know, and who should know you? It absolutely can be done. Who are the influencers in your organization and in your profession? So you want to be thinking about where are they? So what kinds of professional associations are they? So having a goal, if you put yourself out a year, who should you be adding to your network? And we suggest that you build what we call a AAA network. That is 3 sets of people. This is going to be one of your greatest career assets. probably even beyond the technical knowledge and skills you have, having a strong network is absolutely essential. So the first people are the acquaintances. These are people who know who you are. You could call them and they'd recognize your name, and they probably would respond if you asked them for a meeting or that you asked them to do something for you. This may include an awful lot of people who are in your LinkedIn network. A lot of those are probably acquaintances. It's important that you are building these. And then the next level are allies. These are people who have some kind of personal experience with you. They know a little bit more about what you can do. They can speak on your behalf. They can do a reference for you. So you're going to be, you want allies in your network. And then finally, the real gold in your network are the advocates. These are your evangelists, or the people that will go to bat for you, who will promote you and your cause without even having to ask. You want to be creating advocates as you build your network. Now, if you're starting out, if you're fairly new in your career, you probably have a lot of acquaintances, a lot of fellow students, former bosses, co-workers, etc. You probably have a lot of allies and maybe not quite so many advocates. But as you, if you're in the middle of your career, I would say the total of these people, you should be thinking about having 200, 300, 400 people in this. If you're active on LinkedIn, you're obviously going to build a lot in the acquaintance category. But as you're working, you always want to try being cementing acquaintances. You want to be converting some of these acquaintances into allies, and you always want to be thinking about, you know, who could be my advocate and who could I advocate for. You know, I think if you have 15 to 20 advocates, true advocates in your network, that is really that is really good. And you want to be staying in touch with them and reaching them probably 4 or 5 times a year. Touch base with them anyway. So we have a question already. Do advocates need to be people who have worked with you closely? No. They might be people in your same profession. They could be a mentor, but they're not necessarily the same thing. And the second part of that question is, do they have to be in the same location? And you can absolutely build advocates at a distance, although it's harder. This is not something you can do by email or by LinkedIn. This is something where you really have to put some personal capital into it and really build a closer relationship. So I would say you can continue it, you can maintain your advocate if at a distance, but getting it going, an advocate is not going to be something you can do by email. So here's one. What's your thought on accepting friend requests on LinkedIn? Should you accept every request from acquaintances to build your network, or be more strategic? I would say yes, and yes. You want to be careful who you're linking with, but I think there's rules about, there used to be a rule of thumb, you don't want to network with anyone, or you don't want to accept anybody unless you know them well. That's not so true anymore. I would say I do accept requests from most people that ask me, other than when I'm speaking to a group. I'll sometimes get an email from someone I have no idea who they are, and I don't accept those. But if someone says, oh, I was in the audience when you spoke to such and such a group, I just accepted one of those last night. And I'm very happy to do that. So I would say don't be too conservative in how you, and on who you accept, but don't be too loose either. So good question. Okay, so you're going to do your AAA network, and I would start by just writing down everyone you know who's in one of those 3 categories, and set a goal for yourself. So in the next year, how many people could you deepen and tighten the relationship, and who do you want to add to your acquaintances? So, for example, let's just say you're in marketing. Who should you be thinking about adding to your network? Well, maybe there are some senior marketing people in your organization. Those would be some I would start with. How about a couple of search firms in the city where you're living, where they focus on marketing? They should know who you are, and you should be able to go to them. Excuse me. So you want to think about a year out, who do you want to add to your acquaintances? Who do you want to deepen relationships with? And what advocates do you really want to solidify? Okay, so we have a question kind of back to the first leg of the stool here. What is the thin line where we don't come off as bragging? I think if you simply talk about what you're doing rather than how great it is. You don't have to say, I won 5 awards for that. Or you can say, you know, we just finished project XYZ. We used to name projects when I worked for one of my companies. I won't give those names, but we just finished that project, and you know, the launch went quite well. I think that if you say what you're learning, so one of the things is I just went to a course on how to use LinkedIn more strategically, and I think actually it's something that our work group could use. And when that is not bragging, and you're offering something that people could be useful and it could be helpful to the company. So I think that's one way. That's just talk about what you're learning and doing without, you know.
And I'd even say, like, sometimes if you're working on a work project where it's a collaboration, and you can also talk up another person or another sector. That's like 2 for 1 almost.
That's right. Yes, and in fact, one of the things we talk about in the book is promoting your colleagues. So you know, you have somebody who really did a bang up job on the team with you. You can say, wow, I just worked with Mary, and did she ever save the team's bacon at one point? So you can promote other people. You are also promoting yourself when you promote other people. So thanks, John. That was a great suggestion. Okay, so we know that the right mindset and the being strategic about who should be in your network are the first 2 barriers to overcome. The third one is tactics. That is, what do I say? How do I do this? And those of you who think you're introverts, I am actually an introvert, so it's hard for me sometimes to dial that phone or to send an email. But one of the things is to learn how to ask some questions. So for example, when you're meeting with somebody, when you're building your network, you want to show interest in the other people. You want to help other people. So you have some good questions. Learn how to ask open-ended questions. The first thing in my first job I had in my professional career is I was an interviewer, a recruiter for a bank. And I went to a workshop on how to ask open-ended questions. I still use the skills I learned in that because people like to talk about themselves. And if you can ask people questions about themselves and plan some questions and have some questions that are kind of in your back pocket that always work. We have a list of about 1 page of about 15 questions in our book that you can ask. If you're at a professional association, for example, I'm new. You can say, I'm new here. Have you belonged to this organization? How did you happen to come to this meeting? How are you connected with John and Joe who are putting on the event or whatever? So there's a lot of ways to learn how to do that. We have a section on learning to work a room. One thing that is dreaded by so many people is to walk into a room where everybody else seems to know each other and you don't know very many people. So how do you get into a conversation and how do you exit a conversation? Another thing to do is we teach people how to use conferences in a way to build your network as well as to learn the content that's being taught. So we have one section, for example, on what do you do before a conference or meeting, what do you do during, and what do you do after in a way that cements them. And so we have another question. How do you know when someone is your advocate? Good question. Do you ask them to be, or do they tell you no? You don't ask people if they'll be it. What you do is go to somebody for advice. And when they give you some advice and you've done something about it, you can go back and thank them. Hey, I went and did this and I really appreciated your introduction to someone. So you can, an advocate is similar to a network mentor, but it's not the same thing, because an advocate can actually help you get ahead. A mentor will help you, but not kind of on the out front part. So sponsors and mentors are not the same thing. Somebody has a question, a few specific networking tactics when you're one of the few women in the room or on the staff. Good question. You know, you don't want to spend all your time, excuse me, with other women, because then you're going to limit your network. So you can even be, you know, being honest and truthful is helpful. You can ask, you know, go up to somebody who looks a bit familiar and say, hey, you look like you've been part of this organization for a while. I see that there aren't very many women. Why do you belong here? Are there more women at other meetings? But you can go up to men, and it's the same kind of thing. Have some really good questions that are about the content of the meeting or on the staff, and ask people questions. You will be amazed at what good questions will do to build relationships. Okay, the last barrier is the one that was mentioned by several people. That's time. Now, I know most of you are working full bore out. You're really busy, but the best time to build a network is when you don't really need it. And so you have to be doing it while you're working. We know that you can do if you look out a year, you can build a really good network in 12 months in about 4 hours a month. And we actually have some free downloadable plans on our website, which is tactfulselfpromotion.com, a networking plan for a year, that all the pieces that you'll want to put into place, and a kind of a schedule for how you're going to do it. And then for those of you who need one quickly, we have the Fast Start Networking Guide. So those are free downloadable PDFs that you can get off our website at any time. So take that website down. So any questions in addition to those that have come in about networking?
We had one question earlier from an alumna that was talking about in her profession, she works to reduce or prevent sexual violence against women and children. And so it was kind of, the question was when your profession might be a conversation killer or something that's maybe uncomfortable for others to hear. How do you position that in the best way?
Good question. I would have to think about that one very specifically, but I would say I would talk about, I work with empowering women to be in charge of their lives. There it is at the top. Yep. So I would think about what are the positive things that you can talk about in your job that would make people ask more questions. Because I know in a job like that, you're working on empowering other people, you're working on helping people with get ahead, helping people face the daily problems they have. So what I would do is select the most positive but truthful way that you do that, and I would do it. I would do it that way. And quite honestly, you know, when I do this as a webinar, I wish that I could talk with each one of you individually and work on yours, because I know that every one of you could come up with a wonderful branding statement and some accomplishment statements. But we can't do that, so I'm doing my best here. So somebody here, what's your go-to open-ended question? Favorite small talk opener? Good question. I'll give you one. We actually have it in the book, and it's the one my husband asked me on our first date, so many years ago. And he still asks people the question, and he still gets people to open up and talk about themselves. and that is, what do you like? What are your hobbies? What do you like to do outside of work? Now, he'll talk to people I've known for a long time, and I didn't know that about them necessarily. So that still works. I'm a little tired of hearing it, quite frankly, but it still is a question that works. In terms of vivid language, this is a question. Are there words that you would suggest using that are impactful? Oh boy. This one is this is specific to your business, but you don't want to use words like strategic and leverage and things that are jargon. What I would do is ask 5 people who have known your work to describe what is it that you do well, and you will hear some really great phrases. I ask people questions. Okay, tell me, if I have 500 resumes, tell me what it is you do that is, why should I look at your resume? And they'll start talking. Then I'll ask them what their boss would say about them. And I'll ask them what their peers or their customers would say about them. And I get them talking, and I write down everything they have said. And amazingly, we put together something, and they say, wow, that's great. And I said, well, it's your words. You just didn't put them together that way. So you on your resume and in your there's a question here about using technical competency in interviews and in in-depth conversations. You certainly will want to talk a little bit about technical competency, but when you're just doing a short introduction of yourself, you don't need technical competency. People aren't looking for that. They're looking for, what can you do for me? So I would say put the technical things in your resume, in your interview one, and on your resume, but not on anything that you use to talk about yourself. Okay, so I want to get to the last one, which is increasing your constructive visibility. So this is getting known beyond the people that you know personally. Now, there are lots of ways to do this. I'm going to list a few here. First of all, you can volunteer for a professional or industry association. You can present at local professionals, even present at your local PTA, whatever. Getting accustomed to being out there and talking about some things you can do. You can write an article in a magazine, newspaper, blog, and believe me, I do not consider myself a writer, and I've found that by doing it over and over, I'm getting it's a little bit easier, not taking so much time. You can teach a course at a local high school. You can volunteer at a nonprofit you care about. You can get involved in your kids' organizations. There's some number of things you can do just as in the course of your life. But what you want to do is, first of all, show up online. And you want to make sure that presence is cleaned up. And if you do only one thing, and you really, the most important thing for people in working in professional positions is to have your LinkedIn really top-notch. And most of us aren't. Please don't look at mine because it's not very good. That's on my to-do list for the next couple of weeks. But you want to have your headline, which a lot of people put their title. You can take parts of your branding statement and put it in there. Mm-hmm. You want to read different people's summaries, because the summary, that has changed over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of how that should sound. It should be personal. It should show some enthusiasm. It should have some things that you're really proud of. Then contribute to online forums, join LinkedIn groups, write blogs, go to association websites and contribute to those. Millennials in particular are creating their own websites. I wouldn't do that if I didn't have my own business, but more and more people do that, and I think eventually all professional people will be having their own website. I don't think you need a tweet, but you can do it strategically. I don't think you need to be on Facebook, although probably everybody is, but for professional, it's really LinkedIn. You don't need to do everything that's on this list. Just pick something and start. Focus gaining some visibility within a targeted community. Who needs to know you exist and needs to know about you? We're not going to dig into all these meetings, all these ideas, but I'm going to finish with the second part of Natasha's story. So some of them will illustrate what I've just talked about. So she got her international assignment. She did a good job. She came back home and decided she was probably ready for either a bigger job or to go out on her own as a consultant. She needed broader visibility, national visibility. So the article had worked so well, she decided to do it again, only this time about a current trend that would tie to her new ambitions. Using her prior article, her experience, she pitched the National Association newsletter, and they were interested. So she interviewed leaders, built new relationships outside her company in various areas, and once it was published, she put it in the publications section of her LinkedIn and her own blog on her website. She posted an update with the link. Occasionally, she'd post a link on a group forum when she could be of great value, and she made a short video of the items from her article and posted it in Pulse, which is LinkedIn's long-form blog. So she had met a lot of pretty high-level people, well-known people. She decided she'd pitch something for a national conference where she asked some of these executives to come and speak on a panel that she facilitated. So there she was. She wrote the proposal, she got there, and there she was with leaders in her field without having to say, I am the leader. She was facilitating this. So she posted updates and she followed up, and there she was, like, here I am in New York presenting. So there are lots of things you can do. This last bucket of increasing visibility is more time consuming than the other two. So it's not something that I'd say you have to do. I would say start with making sure you're clear on your brand and then work on building your network. So if we take a look at the screen, you'll see the model and all the elements to the model. We talked about two of them under positioning yourself, crafting your brand, and sharing your accomplishments. We talked a little bit about networking strategy and a little bit about increasing your value, increasing your visibility, excuse me. So I've covered a lot, but I've only touched on a few of the ideas that we've packed into this book. I talked as fast as I could, but we worked really hard on this, and the reason we did it was not to make money. It was because we've seen so many people who just aren't getting the recognition they deserve. People like you who are doing good and great work, but didn't get recognized for it. They didn't get the assignments they were looking for. They didn't. Some people, you know, some of the people we saw blew me away on their competence, and how an organization could say we don't need them was beyond me. But a lot of it, some of it was they just were not promoting themselves. That's why this matters a lot. In many ways, it matters as much as your technical skills. You've heard the phrase, it's not who you know, it's what, or not what you know, it's who you know, and that is absolutely true. And it's who you know, and do they know what you can do? So I don't want your careers to stall. I want you to make the contribution you're capable of and get the recognition, opportunities, and rewards that you deserve. So it's time to elevate your game. So you can go to our website. You can go to the website and sign up for a newsletter. We send out a newsletter every 2 weeks. John gets it, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sure you read it end to end every 2 weeks to help you keep on track. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. We tweet out a tip once a week, so you can find us there. But you can do it. It is one small step at a time. First of all, do a great job at what you're doing. Figure out what you want to be known for. Be ready for the inevitable question, so how are you doing? Create a plan for connecting with people and be strategic about it. So thanks very much. I don't know that we have time for any additional questions.
Yeah, I think, well, again, Nancy's information's up there, and as you said, you're on LinkedIn as well.
I am on LinkedIn, and also you can email me via our website. It's nancy@tactfulselfpromotion.com. I'm happy to respond to individual emails.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It was
You're
a pleasure
welcome.
having you on the series, and actually kind of thinking about what you were talking about with acquaintances and things like that. We became acquainted probably well over a year ago.
Yes.
But you know, just both staying in touch with each other and now doing this webinar, but then also like you were saying, I've been able to stay in touch with what you're doing through our LinkedIn connection, through newsletters, and vice versa.
And through your Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah, so hopefully that's one small example of how this has worked, and I would definitely echo Nancy's sentiments as far as social media doesn't necessarily replace in person or over the phone connection, but it can be a great way to at least start making some of those acquaintances that you can build into those allies and then advocates down the road.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, and we'll wrap up here. Again, more webinars will be coming this spring. We got some great topics coming up, and those will be at umnalumni.org/virtual. And again, I would like to thank all alumni, students, and friends who have taken time to join us this fall. And we'll, as Nancy mentioned before, we will be doing an email to all those who have registered for this webinar with the recording link, and then we'll also do, I think, a PDF of the slides.
Right.
We'll do that, and so hopefully we'll get that out by end of day Thursday. So be on the lookout for that. Thanks again for all 477,000 alumni of the University of Minnesota who've helped support this series and supported the U of M. Thank you again for your time. We will see you in the spring. Go Gophers, Ski-U-Ma.